Good morning, everyone. So I'm Frans Van Assche from the University of Belgium, Leuven in Belgium. And, well, I'm semi-retired there. It means I'm trying to retire. So I'm going to talk about inclusive education and well-being. Because, let's say, this project is part of the Erasmus Plus program, a key action there about inclusive education. So it means, of course, that we have to relate to that. And the first question is, what people are we talking about? What young people are we talking about? So I'm using here a definition or a list of people coming from DG EAC, Education and Culture, a directorate of the European Commission of 2014. And you see here the people that we have to care about. Those are people with disabilities, health problems, educational difficulties, cultural differences like immigrants, refugees, and so on, economic obstacles, social obstacles, like discrimination, and geographical obstacles, like that schools are in rural areas, and so on. Let us then look at what the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education is saying, also an agency of the European Commission in 2018. And how they define inclusive education is that all the people that we have actually seen with disabilities and so on, they should be able to follow education like anyone else. So inclusive education, according to this Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education, is understood as a provision of high-quality education in schools that value the rights, equality, access, and participation of all learners. So it means that all those people with disabilities, with learning difficulties, and so on, must have access, equal access to education. And while social inclusion is, of course, a goal of inclusive education, it is a little bit different. So how the same agency defines it is that social inclusion is mainly about social interaction and community participation in areas of education, but also employment and living in the community. So it's more about the whole of the society. Yeah? But inclusive education is, of course, intended to be fostering social inclusion. Later in the day, my colleagues will speak more about why this is important, going into cost benefits and so on. Now, there are different ways or different ways of educating, and here is an example of education with exclusion. It means in the middle you have the regular education, but a number of people are excluded. It can be, for instance, Roma, but not everyone has access to, for instance, high-quality education like Eton in the UK and so on. So not everyone has access to that. So people are excluded, or it could also be, for instance, in when people have health problems. Nowadays it's easier with the use of ICT that people can still participate, but it is quite still a problem that sick people don't have access to education. then let's say the evolution of that was to have education in organized, of course, from an economic point, most effectively or efficiently. Let's say we have the regular education, and then we make special schools for those people with special needs. And this is known as segregated education. While this had quite a number of disadvantages, one was thinking, well, let's go to a more integrated approach, and let's integrate all those people in the same educational system. However, how that has been implemented, unfortunately, is often a one-way assimilation, that the students, the pupils, have to conform to the existing system. They have to adapt. While inclusive education starts from the same premise, in the sense that, okay, we want to include everyone, but there the idea is actually that we leave them more with their talents and so on, but the intention is more to let them shine, to let them thrive. Yeah? So this is actually what we want to achieve with inclusive education. It's quite very ambitious, and our thesis there is then that inclusive education is next to impossible without well-being. And this is what we will elaborate in a few slides more. Now, if we are looking at well-being itself, there are many definitions of well-being. It even goes to climate change and so on. But we want to focus on the well-being as it is of use in the field of education. And here we are using the model of Dodge and other people that consider well-being essentially as a balance between challenges and resources. And Dodge defined that in terms of psychological, social, physical challenges, and psychological, social, and physical resources that people have. When we apply this to education, we get the following. So the challenges that are typically posed there are educational objectives. And typically, well, you can read the literature about that. You will find that in Bloom, Cradwell, Massia, and Dave. They are actually dealing with the cognitive objectives, affective and psychomotoric objectives of education. For instance, in vocational education and training, people need to learn how to bake or how to work with metal, and so on. And on the other hand, on the resource side, you have the talents, of course, of the students, of the pupils, which might be different for each individual. But there you have also acquired skills during education. And you see that while people are being educated and learn, the challenges are increased in terms of cognitive, affective, and psychomotoric, but also the resources are increased. So one keeps there the balance. This is the ideal. However, when we go to inclusive education and we bring in here the people that we have been concerned with, people with disabilities, health problems, educational difficulties, cultural difference, and so on, you see here that the challenges are for the student, for the pupil, are actually much bigger than the usual educational challenges that a pupil would have. And this creates a certain imbalance. This is one thing. the other thing is that less resources of the student itself can be used for educational purposes, for educational objectives. Because those students have to deal with all the challenges, like, for instance, discrimination and other things, physical disabilities and so on. Now, the problem is compounded if we don't take care of well-being. So there we will see, for instance, if one is not really taking care of well-being, you will have students with anxiety, bullying will be there will be poor motivation, discrimination, injustice, and you see the problem is really compounded. Not only those students have less opportunities, but they even have more challenges in terms of well-being. And it has been shown in literature that certain, let's say, the fewer opportunities, like, for instance, coming from a lower income, leads to those kinds of well-being challenges. Now, to illustrate that, I've taken here a few examples from an OECD report of students' well-being. And this is more than, well, it's about 530 pages, the report of well-being from the OECD. But it gives you a few examples. For instance, PISA 2015, PISA are the reference studies from OECD that every Ministry of Education is anxious to get, or get anxiety to get it sometimes. And it shows that anxiety about schoolwork, homework and tests is negatively related to performance in science, mathematics and reading. It also says, for instance, disadvantaged students have less motivation to achieve than advantaged students do. And students who are amongst the most motivated score 38 points higher in science and so on. And 38 points higher in science, it means a full year of science education that they are losing. Students across OECD countries who reported that they feel like an outsider score again 20 points lower in science. Schools where the incidence of bullying is high by international standards score 47 points lower. So it's more than a year that they are losing. Yeah? So what we need to do is really get rid of those well-being challenges and replace it on the other side of the balance with well-being resources, such as respect, tolerance, care, empathy, non-discrimination, good learner-teacher, good learner-parent relationships. Again, in this well-being report of the OECD, it is very clear that the relationship between learner and teacher and learner and parents is very important and very effective. So how does TM fit into this? Now, TM is actually working on the different levels. So it is reducing the challenges, it's reducing bullying, for instance, in school. It's increasing the resources. Like, for instance, it would improve the relationship between teacher and students. And TM has also a secret weapon. And that is, as you can see, it puts springs under the balance. And every day, when one is meditating twice, it brings you back in balance. And this has the effect, actually, that not only it brings you in balance, but the quality of TM is that it's a self-balancing technique. So it's not really dependent on external interventions that everyone has to do and so on. It's self-balancing. And another important thing is it's going beyond the intellect. It's not explaining what caring and empathy and tolerance is. It is actually transforming the students to become tolerant, which is quite different. So in conclusion, we can say inclusive education is next to impossible without well-being, and QTTM is actually a technique that will fulfill those promises. Thank you very much.